traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and of sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination. There's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the narrow mind.
Good morning once again from Southern California. Welcome to another fix of the narrow mind. I'm glad that you joined us on this Wednesday morning, Atheistic Wednesday. Usually, if you're new to the narrow mind, let me explain how this works. Usually on Wednesday morning, we address topics that have to do with atheism and unbelief in general. And so we're going to do that this morning. All of you regular listeners out there probably noticed that we didn't do a show last night. And the reason for that is because I was not feeling well. In fact, I wasn't feeling well all day yesterday. And I'm still not feeling well this morning. I'm feeling better than yesterday. And so at about 8:30 this morning, West Coast time, I was trying to make a decision whether or not I was actually going to do the radio program. And all I could think of is all of our faithful narrow mind addicts coming to the website or opening up their pod feed and realizing that there wasn't another show. And so I decided to bite the bullet for you. Just kidding. I'm still not feeling well, and so I have no idea if my brain is going to be functioning well this morning. I've had a headache for the last 3 days. This morning is the first day that I've woke up without a full headache. It's still a little bit, kind of like you can feel that headache in the background there, like it could turn into a headache once again. So I'm going to try to do my best this morning to bring you another edition of the Narrow Mind that will be in some way edifying for you as a believer, or maybe even edifying for you as an atheist or an unbeliever. We have a lot of unbelievers, atheists, even cult members that listen to our program. And so we'd like to welcome you as well. Now, on the Monday evening show, I was doing a segment, I did the full hour on the Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine, really a basic introduction of how to defend your faith against Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to your house. And so we got quite a bit of feedback from that, and I thank you for that. And I also mentioned on the Monday evening show that I wanted to do a little experiment, and that was I was asking all of our narrow mind addicts. Now, if you're new to the program, you probably have no idea what a narrow mind addict is, and that's okay. Just be careful because the addiction will sneak up on you before you know it. So I'm asking all of our narrow mind addicts to participate in an experiment that I'm conducting. And this is the experiment. I want you to pick up your phone, not right now, but if you're listening to this show live, then pick up your phone at 10 o'clock and call the Narrow Mind at 1-800-466-1873 and leave me a voicemail. Give me your name, city, and state, and confess that you are a narrow mind addict. Now, we had a ton of these come in just as a result of the Monday program, and it tickles my heart to know that I am not just speaking here to this microphone that's sitting in front of my face, but there actually are live people out there that are listening to the program and enjoying it. So this actually motivates me. It helps me know that I'm doing some type of service, something of value to you. And so I appreciate that. I got a kick out of the messages that were left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to string them together. I'm just going to string them together in one continual stream. And probably on Friday of this week, depending on how many we get, I'm going to play it from beginning to end. And then I'll continue to add on and play it occasionally. But I was just amazed at how many people immediately respond within the first 24 hours. And so that's great. If you didn't catch the Monday night program, I did mention that our numbers came in for the month of March, and we had 19,600 downloads on the Narrow Mind podcast. So that is an all-time record for us. We're happy about that. We're also thankful for all of our new annual subscribers. And we are currently configuring. We've got the podcast, the high-quality podcast up. It's just a matter of configuring it so that you can securely connect with the feed as an annual subscriber. Because now what we've done, if you're listening to this via podcast, by the way, which most of you are going to be listening to this via podcast, we have reduced the quality of the podcast. And the reason for that is because, bandwidth. Bandwidth costs money. And so as much as we would like to keep everything free, we had to reduce the quality because we were getting too much traffic to our dinky little server. So we're hoping eventually to get a new server, and then we won't have this problem. But what we've done is we've created a new high-quality feed for our annual subscribers. And so that is going to be available. Hopefully it'll be available sometime this week. I have our web guy, Tony Casparo, working on that right now. He's busy on that. Christian already actually configured everything, and so it's just a matter of getting it available to our Narrow Mind annual subscribers. If you're not a Narrow Mind annual subscriber, you definitely want to jump on the bandwagon so that you can continue to get all of the Narrow Mind broadcast in their high-quality format. You can do that by just going to the homepage. And by the way, we were running a special during the month of March for $29.99. You may notice that the price has gone up, $39.99, but we are throwing something extra in there to make up for the additional cost. The original price was $50, so we don't complain about $39.99. We've got some people that subscribed at $50 that didn't get any freebies, and that was the price for a while. But we decided to start running some specials. We had a lot of success during the month of March, and so we're hoping that we'll pick up some new subscribers during the month of April. Now, when you purchase a subscription, you actually help us pay for the expenses here. You help us pay for the bandwidth. You help us pay for the phone lines, the 800 lines, upgrade equipment, all that stuff. You help us pay for that, so it doesn't come out of my pocket, and I appreciate that. So, $39.99 for the month of April, and you get a copy of my book, The Baptism Cult, an expose of the International Church of Christ. Basically, this book deals with all the arguments that the Church of Christ uses, whether it's the International Church of Christ, the Fundamental Church of Christ, the Mainstream Church of Christ, or the We're Just Weird Church of Christ. No matter which denomination within the Church of Christ you're dealing with, you will be equipped with this book to actually refute every single passage that they bring up, where they try to prove, in case you're unfamiliar with them, they try to prove that your water baptism is what calls down God from heaven. That's right. Your water baptism, basically, when you climb in the water, in the Church of Christ only, we've got to keep that small detail in perspective, only in the Church of Christ, when you climb in the water, your relationship with God begins. Well, we know that the Bible teaches us that we're not saved by what we do, but we're saved by faith in what Christ did. So you're talking about two radically different types of religion, one being in accordance with the truth, and one being just another scheme of the evil one. All right, tomorrow, Covenant Theology Thursday, just a reminder at 3 p.m., and then on Friday, open phones at 6 p.m. in the evening, taking your calls, comments, complaints, whatever it is you have on your mind. All right, let's get to what we have to talk to today. And I do want to mention that I'm going to have to cut today's program short a little bit, so we're probably only going to do about 45 minutes rather than the full hour. The reason is because I have an appointment, and the person that's coming to pick me up to take me to the meeting is going to be here at 10 o'clock. So I have to be ready to go at 10 o'clock. It's a very important appointment, by the way. I can't go into much detail, but I'm going to meet with somebody who is involved in contributing large amounts of money to nonprofit corporations. And so we're going to present to him the work that we are doing in Africa. If you're unfamiliar with the work that we're doing in Africa, just go to YouTube and do a search for Goshen Village. That's Goshen Village. And you'll see the work that we're doing in Africa. We started a local church. We're in stage 2 of the plan, and we're now building the orphanage. And we haven't really had a whole lot of outside funding. We've had a few brothers that have, contributed toward the work, but the majority of the money has come out of my own pocket. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get some of these organizations that have money available, that contribute money to works such as ours, taking care of orphans. And so if you could remember to pray for us and pray for me today as I go and present this plan to this person, I would really appreciate it. If you want to know how to spell Goshen Village, it's Goshen, and we've got a 10-minute video uploaded to YouTube. Now, 2 of my listeners sent me a link to a 7-minute, it's a 7-minute video that has some highlights. I don't even remember if it's video or audio, to tell you the truth. When I looked at this, I was so out of it yesterday. I can't remember what it was, but you're only going to hear the audio, so that's the important part. You're You're not going to be able to see the video. You're only going to hear the audio. If you want to see the video, do a search for Rick Warren and Sam Harris and Newsweek. Those are probably the first 3 keywords that'll take you over to the Newsweek website, where they have a feature debate between Rick Warren and Sam Harris. Now, once again, I mentioned it's only 7 minutes, but this is something that's going to be featured. I don't know if it's going to be a written debate or if it's going to be just little highlights that are going to be featured in the April 9th issue of Newsweek. But they do have a little video available here that kind of gives you a taste of the debate. Now, let me just read to you what it says here on the Newsweek website. It says, April 9th, 2007 issue, Rick Warren is as big as a bear with a booming voice and easygoing charm. Sam Harris is compact, reserved, and despite the polemical tone of his books, friendly and mild. Warren, one of the best-known pastors in the world, started Saddleback in 1980. Now 25,000 people attend the church. Harris is a softer-spoken. Paragraphs pour out of him, complex and fact-filled as befits a Ph.D. student in neuroscience. At Newsweek's invitation, they met in Warren's office recently and chatted mostly amiably for 4 hours. John Meacham moderated. Excerpts follow. So, I'm going to go ahead and play. There's a few excerpts here. I'm going to go ahead and play the video feed. Now, just to give you an idea, if you don't know who Sam Harris is a guy who's written a couple of books on atheism. He's basically spewing the same old diatribe. Show me the evidence. I don't have any evidence. Look at all the gods. There's so many gods. Except for he doesn't sound like that. In case you don't know who Rick Warren is one of the fathers of the seeker sensitivity movement. Seeker sensitivity, i.e. pony rides for the kids, Krispy Kreme donuts and Starbucks coffee, popsicles and ice cream sandwiches after the service, big screen TVs with no mention of sin or adultery, homosexuality, anything else that is offensive. So he is one of the fathers of the seeker church model, the seeker sensitive model as we call it, which the Bible says there are none of. That's right. Romans chapter 3, there are none that seek after God. So basically he's ministering to a bunch of people, or attempting to minister. I'm not going to doubt that there are Christians. I'm not going to doubt that he's a Christian. But just ask him about the crowd if you get a chance to talk to him. The crowd is the big group. And so he's attempting to minister to a bunch of people that God says don't exist. So what does that tell us about the people that are coming to his church? They're definitely not coming to God they're not coming to his church because they're seeking God. They're coming to his church because they're seeking to be entertained. They're seeking to be, where else can you get free Krispy Kreme donuts and Starbucks coffee on a Sunday morning and make the wife happy at the same time? So, without saying anything more derogatory about Rick Warren's methodology, which I think it is, well, for lack of a better term, it's disgusting. It is unchristian. I have no patience for the seeker-sensitive movement. It's a man-centered approach to church. It's a man-centered approach to God. It's a man-centered approach to evangelism, worship, and preaching. And quite frankly, in Christianity, we don't have any room for man-centered approaches. So let me go ahead and play the clip here, and we'll get to experience firsthand Rick Warren's man-centered approach to the defense of the Christian faith. Now, hopefully there's not going to be a bunch of commercials strung in here, but if there are, you're just going to have to be patient with us. I hit play. And there's the first commercial.
I'm using Windows Mobile to get my Outlook email, and I'm duct taped to a lamppost.
He is, too. He's duct taped to a lamppost at the top.
I lost my expense report.
Now, that was funny. That's worth watching. Even if you don't pick up any...
Praying that you're still there. It's Newsweek on Air. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Rebecca Miles.
Of course, I see the fingerprints of God everywhere. I see it in culture. I see it in law. I see it in literature. I see it in nature. I see it in human behavior. I see it in my own life. trying to understand where God came from, which is a typical, well, if God is God, where did he come from? That's like an ant trying to understand the internet. We don't have the brain capacity to understand God.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that there's no evidence for such a God. And I think it's instructive to notice that we are all atheists with respect to the thousands of other dead gods who now nobody worships, Zeus and Poseidon and Thor and Isis. I mean, these were gods that were, at one point, many of them for many centuries, were in good standing among generations of human beings who worshipped them, who thought that they intervened in the fates of themselves and their neighbors.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there for just a second. And I'm going to make comments concerning both of the statements that we both heard from both of the speakers. Now, Rick Warren, he's taking a natural approach to defending the Christian faith. This is a big mistake. This is a huge mistake. Now listen to what he says. He says, I see the fingerprints, which is kind of a cutesy little statement, as if God actually had fingerprints. It has no actual meaning whatsoever. I see the fingerprints of God he says everywhere, in culture, in law, in literature, in nature, in behavior, in his own life. And then he says, we don't have the capacity to understand God. Well, I've got a couple of problems with those two statements right there. Number one, that we see the fingerprints all over. Okay, well, it may be true that the Christian sees the fingerprints of God, if you want to even use that terminology. In other words, we look at nature and we see that nature is God's handiwork. The unbeliever is completely blind. And in whatever sense he would be able to see the handiwork of God, he is ever ready to suppress that truth in unrighteousness. Okay, so any beam of light that happens to bust through nature and bear witness to God, we read about this in Romans chapter 1. What does the unbeliever do? He suppresses that truth. He says, oh, there's a beam of light. Boom. And he pushes it down like a child pushing a volleyball under the water in a pool. He's not interested in seeing God in creation. In fact, when he does see, once again, he denies because he lives in a state of self-denial. Not self-denial, self-deception, which is the denial of God, the very God whose image he is made in. And so man denies the very image that he possesses. Now, we've been talking about this in presuppositional apologetics. Now, the other thing that Rick Warren says that is troubling to me is that we don't have the ability to comprehend God. He said it. We don't have the ability to comprehend God. He said that for a human being trying to comprehend God, it would be the equivalent of an ant trying to comprehend the internet. Now, if he's talking about the totality of God, then I would agree. There is no way that man, finite man, can comprehend the infinite God. But that's not to say that we can't comprehend God. That's not to say that we can't comprehend the being of God, that there is a God, and that this God has made himself known. So God has revealed himself, and certainly God expects us as believers to be able to comprehend that which he has revealed himself. Now, I haven't heard the whole debate, but if this is where the debate starts, in my estimation, without even hearing the whole debate, Rick Warren's already lost. Because he's trying to defend Christianity from nature. And you can't defend Christianity from nature. You can't. You can't even know for sure who Jesus Christ is from nature. So how are you going to defend Christianity from nature? He should have started with the Word of God. Now, we can only assume that he was asked the question, where did God come from? And that's just a stupid question. Where did God come from? The Bible says that God is eternal. So God didn't come from anywhere. All right? God always was, God always is, and God always will be. There is a difference. So that's called reification, when you try to attribute attributes to something or someone that lives in a whole different category. For example, man comes from somewhere. the earth comes from somewhere. That's because these are all things that are created. So it is a fallacy to ask the question about the uncreated creator, where he comes from. It's a fallacy because if you're uncreated, you've always existed. Now, let's move over to what Sam Harris says. Sam Harris basically spit out two arguments. He says, number one, it's clear that there's no evidence for God. Number two, he says, we are all atheists in regards to the thousands of gods that exist other than the Christian God. In respect to the Zeuses, he says, the other thousands of dead gods now that nobody worships. Well, let's deal with that one first. Now, Mr. Harris, with all due respect, if Christianity is true, wouldn't we expect these gods to be, quote-unquote, dead? In other words, if there are formally gods such as Zeus that were once worshipped in the zenith of their culture, and yet at the same time, history tells us that in another part of the world, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, was being worshipped, and he's the only true God, wouldn't we expect these gods to fizzle out? And furthermore, if they didn't fizzle out, which many of them have not, wouldn't we expect Christians to deny the existence of them? So, it's just a play on words to say, well, you're an atheist too, Rick Warren, because you don't believe in the thousands of gods. Of course we don't. Because we believe in the only true God. What's so hard to understand about that? And why is that? How is that in some way an argument against Christianity? It's not. It's not an argument against Christianity at all. It's trying to get some naive unbeliever out there, some naive atheist to say, oh yeah, hey, I didn't think about that, man. You're an atheist too. I mean, let's be real. How is that an argument against Christianity? Now, the other thing that I find extremely hilarious is that this is, and by the way, I've heard Sam Harris, I've heard him on NPR radio, which is National Public Radio. They interviewed him and they played this thing in some loop or playlist over and over and over again. So every time I would turn on NPR radio, I was hearing this interview with Sam Harris, and he's like a broken record. There's no evidence for Christianity. There's no evidence for God. There's no evidence, he says. And everybody knows that, according to Sam Harris. Well, we're going to argue that there's all kinds of evidence. Just because Sam Harris doesn't like our evidence only displays and identifies him as being an enemy of God. Now, putting the evidence aside, let's deal with the argument. Sam Harris says there's no evidence, as if Sam Harris only believes things which have evidence to support them. Now, since Rick Warren isn't a debater, and since Rick Warren really hasn't taken the time, well, you know, in all fairness, I probably shouldn't say this because I haven't listened to the whole debate, but if I was a gambling man, I would say that Rick Warren doesn't have a clue when basically he wouldn't know how to respond to this type of objection. Rick Warren, there's no evidence for your Christian faith. So what does Rick Warren do? He says, well, there's evidence in creation, there's evidence. When he says that there are fingerprints, that's great. That's just the kind of evidence that Sam Harris wants. He wants to see fingerprints. But the kind of fingerprints you're talking about are not the same kind of fingerprints he's talking about. So how do we deal with this objection when the atheist says, well, there's no evidence for the Christian God? We turn and we ask him, do you only accept beliefs? Do you only believe things on the basis of evidence? And then we'll see how he answers that question. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break.
Do the chickens have large talons?
All right, welcome back once again to The Narrow Mind on this Wednesday morning. Atheistic Wednesday here at The Narrow Mind. We're glad that you're joining us live. If you're not joining us live, we're glad that you're joining us via podcast. Once again, I'm still feeling a little bit under the weather, so my brain is not operating at full capacity, which is really bad because even when my brain is operating at full capacity, it's not operating at full capacity. Because, well, let's just put it this way. I didn't get saved until I was 26 years old. And I probably did damage to a large portion of my mind. But by the grace of God, I'm still able to function, glorify God, worship, and give a defense for the Christian faith, which I'm grateful for. All right, back to the place we were before we dropped off. And by the way, I mentioned we're only going to be able to do about 45 minutes today because I've got to run out of here. But we probably have time for maybe one or two quick questions. So if you have a question, especially if you're an atheist and you like to challenge something that I've said, or a Christian, give us a call at 1-800-466-1873. That's toll free. 1-800-466-1873. Now, it's important for us to remember that when we are confronted with atheists and they ask us, or they suggest that the Christian faith does not have ample evidence to support its claims, we need to remind them that they accept all kinds of things without evidence. All kinds of things. In fact, everyone accepts things without evidence. These are called foundational beliefs, or axiom beliefs, or self-evident beliefs. So these are beliefs that, for lack of a better term, are self-evident. For example, if you're a regular listener, you may recall that I play a clip from a debate, a radio interview between Greg Bonson and some atheist. I don't even know what the guy's name is. But the atheist says, there's no reason to presuppose reason. Well, that's a pretty foolish statement in and of itself. But most human beings say that reason and logic is self-evident. In other words, you don't have to prove that reason exists. Why? Because everybody's using it. You don't have to prove that language exists because everybody's using it. So why is it that we have to prove all of a sudden why is it that we have to supply some type of proofs to satisfy the atheistic mindset that God exists? I mean, isn't it self-evident that everything came from somebody, from something? And the answer is yes. Of course it is. Isn't it self-evident that if Jesus Christ is predicted in the Old Testament hundreds of years before he's born, where he's going to be born, when he's going to be born, what he's going to be like, the things that he's going to accomplish in his ministry, and then all these things come to pass, they try to kill him, and he rises from the dead, and he says, see, I told you. Isn't it self-evident that he is the one who reveals God? Well, for the Christian, the answer is yes. But for the atheist, the answer is no. You see, he wants evidences, but he doesn't want to play by the same rules that he wants you to play by. So when the atheist asks us for evidence, we need to in turn ask him to explain to us how it is that he accepts things without evidence, and yet he demands evidence for belief in God, which to us seems to be very self-evident and a very foundational belief in the human experience. Now, let me just give you an example. He might say, well, I don't accept things without evidence. And if that's the case, just ask him, does he use reason? Or does he employ logic? And if so, on what basis, what was the evidence that suggested to him that one must reason logically? Or even if he does say, well, yeah, there are some things that I accept without evidence, then that's great. Because we have evidence for Christianity. We're not saying that we don't have evidence. We're saying that no evidence will ever satisfy the unbeliever. Why? Because he's an unbeliever. Until his heart is changed by the Holy Spirit, he will not accept Christianity. All right, let's play some more of this clip.
Evangelical icon Rick Warren, best-selling author of The Purpose-Driven Life, and atheist Sam Harris, author of The End of Faith and Letter to a Christian Nation. They debated the existence of God and its implications for the individual and society in a special pre-holiday season symposium organized by Newsweek.
At a time when religion affects...
By the way, let me just throw in something here. Every single year around the time of Easter, there is some attack that comes out against Christianity. Guaranteed. Watch, next year, right before Easter, there's going to be an attack that will come out against Christianity.
votes on fetal stem cell research in the U.S. Congress, the bloody fate of suicide bombers in Iraq, and much in between, the question has at least as much pertinence and power as ever in human existence. In the latest Newsweek poll, 36% said the influence of organized religion on American politics has increased in recent years, with 32% saying it has too much influence and 31% too little. Fully 91% say they believe in God, 82% call themselves Christians, while only 6% say they do not believe in God, and just 3% actually call themselves atheists. But nearly half of all surveyed said the country was more accepting of atheists than in the past, and about the same number claimed to know one.
For more on the Newsweek Symposium on God, we have senior editor Lisa Miller, who helped arrange it. She writes the weekly religion column in our Periscope section and a religion blog at newsweek.com. But first, a bit more of evangelical Warren and atheist Harris themselves from the Newsweek session. In this exchange, they disagreed about the possibility of meaning for human existence if there is no supreme being. First, Warren.
If there is no God, if this is all random chance, if I am simply complicated ooze, if I am an accident, then the truth is your life doesn't matter. My life doesn't matter. And the truth is the nihilistic atheists are the only legitimate atheists because at least they're honest to the logical extension of their belief. Life doesn't matter. You were a freak accident in being born. You're going to be a freak accident and die. And if somebody comes by and does drive-by shooting, too bad. At least they're consistent.
Okay, right there, first of all, and I apologize for the different sound levels, but right there in what Rick Warren just said, that's not an argument for Christianity. That is not an argument for Christianity. That is not an argument against atheism. Life doesn't have meaning if you don't believe what I believe. Well, it might just be, Rick, that life doesn't have meaning. How is that an argument for Christianity? It's not. This is why this traditional method of apologetics is a waste of time, in my opinion. The presuppositional approach is the only approach that I believe is honoring to God and cuts right to the heart of the matter. So what if life doesn't have meaning? Most of these people, they find their own meaning. And so whatever meaning they can ascribe, they're certainly happy with that.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. I let you caricature Christianity. If life is just random chance, then nothing really does matter. And the truth is, there is no morality. It's survival of the fittest. If survival of the fittest means me killing you to survive, so be it. And so, for years, atheists have said there is no God, but they want to live like God exists. They want to live like their lives have meaning. Your life has no meaning. Your life has no significance if we're simply random chance.
Then Harris.
Our morality, the meaning we find in life is a lived experience, which I believe has, to use a loaded term, a spiritual component. I believe that it is possible to radically transform our experience of the world for the better, very much the way someone like Jesus or someone like Buddha witnessed. I mean, there's wisdom in our spiritual contemplative literature that I do not doubt, and I'm actually quite interested in understanding it both personally and scientifically. I think meditation and prayer and other ways of training our attention, without question, affect us for the better. Now the question is, what is reasonable to believe on the basis of those transformations? Is it possible to go to church and experience bliss and experience a new love of one's neighbor that one didn't think was possible, and then move from that experience and say, aha, now I know Jesus was born of a virgin, or the Son of God, or that the Bible is the perfect word of the creator of the universe? I don't think those are legitimate moves. That does not discount the importance and even necessity of that first experience.
Nope. Now to Lisa Miller, did any minds...
a lot of people may not know this, but Sam Harris, although he claims to be an atheist, dabbles in Buddhism. And so that's what he's talking about when he's talking about spirituality. But he makes a good point. How do you go from experience, this is very keen on his part, I'll give him credit for this. How do you go from the experience of Christianity to the truthfulness of Christianity. And I'm going to argue that you don't. Now, remember, Rick Warren starts out by saying, the fingerprints of God are everywhere. They're in my life. What is that? Experience. They're in literature. What is that? Experience. They're in nature. What is that? I experience nature, so they're there. And so he begins with experience and wants to work back to the God of the Bible. That's nothing more than a classical or a traditional approach to defending the faith. And it doesn't work. You have to start with the Bible. You have to start. He's got it completely backwards, and Sam Harris picks up on this. You have to start with a God who is infinite, and you work from there. All right? So we presuppose the truthfulness of God, and we presuppose the truthfulness of God's Word, and then everything else comes into submission to those two presuppositions, God and His Word. That's what the Christian should do. Unfortunately, that's not what many Christians are doing. Unfortunately, many Christians begin with the approach that Rick Warren begins with. They begin with experience. In other words, I know that Christianity is true because if you had known me before I was a Christian, I was a really bad guy. Well, guess what? Muslims, Mormons, and all kinds of people, Jehovah's Witnesses, can use that same subjective argument. We have to begin with the objective. What is the objective? The objective truth is God and His Word, and we start from there. And then our experiences actually conform to God and His Word. You see, because without God and His Word, then life is unintelligible. Rick Warren kind of presented a half-baked transcendental argument there when he said, he started out by saying that life has no meaning, and then he said that it's just survival of the fittest. He was kind of going in the right direction, but I think because he's not a presuppositionalist, he doesn't really know how to kick the goal, if you will. In other words, he doesn't know how to finish it off in such a way that it's effective. What he should have said was, do you believe? See, he needs to do an internal critique. He needs to begin to examine Sam Harris's belief. He needs to ask him, do you believe life has value? Do you believe that we live in such a way that it demonstrates survival of the fittest? The strongest survive, the weakest perish. Now, based on Sam Harris's answer, then you could ask how he would give an account for that. So what Rick Warren is doing, he's just asserting things. He's saying, well, there is no meaning of life, and it is the survival of the fittest, and the atheist nihilists are the only ones that really are consistent. Well, those are just assertions. What you need to do is you need to go into Sam Harris's worldview and start picking it apart. Because he can just say, well, I don't agree with those guys, and I don't agree with you. You really haven't done any damage to his worldview itself. And so I'm a very strong proponent of taking that person's worldview and holding it up to the Word of God, and holding it up, seeing if it's internally consistent. So there's a twofold approach there. There is the defense of the Christian faith, and then there's the internal critique of the atheist or whatever it is. Whatever belief system he has, we do an internal critique, and we show him that given his worldview, he can't account for morality. He can talk about spirituality all day, but he can't account for some form of objective morality, and he can account for the laws of logic. By the way, he starts out by demanding evidence, which tells me that he is employing the laws of logic. So he is employing something that he has no reason to believe in, other than it's just there, which is kind of an excuse or an argument that you better believe that the atheists aren't going to accept. Our time is up for today. I got to run. Thanks for being with us on this Wednesday morning. Be sure and tune in tomorrow for Covenant Theology Thursday as we continue our study on the Ordo Salutis. And be sure and sign up for the email group there on the homepage if you want to keep track of what's going on and what our subject matter is on the Narrow Mind, the weekly schedule. Go right there on the homepage below the download artwork, the download graphic where you have the girl looking through the keyhole. Click on that, send us an email, confirm it, and you will be up to date as far as communication as to what's going on, what's going to be the subject matter for the Narrow Mind. All right, until next time, may the Lord bless the study of His Word.